Hi everybody, my name is Jerry Wise, and today the topic is differentiating ourselves from the surrounding emotional process. And I just want to hit a few points today that might be of help to you. Many of us have experienced codependency or enmeshment, and codependents must choose to separate or differentiate themselves from the surrounding emotional process that's flowing through the whole system before we can begin to see things differently. Without this understanding of objectivity, it becomes impossible to realize how our learning can prevent us from learning. And when I talk about our learning, what I'm talking about is the ways in which we've seen the world, the way we've developed our subjectivity, and the way we see things in relationships as being normal for us. And until we step outside that box, then the box seems like that's all there is. And so I work with clients every day to help them to step outside the box because it changes a lot of things in here and up here when we do that. Why is it that a fly with 1,000 eyes cannot see the window it's trying to fly through? The fly is limited by what it's seeing. It's seeing stuff, but it's limited by what it's seeing, and it's not registering this is a window. It registers it as there is nothing there. And its own paradigm keeps it from seeing the window, and so thus it runs into it, whether with a car or the house, and it will run into a window. Codependents, like many of us are, keep trying to fly through the window of our relationships, and we keep smashing up against the window in our relationships. Though we might be an empath, which I think of having 1,000 eyes, in other words, we can see and sense all kinds of things, but we may not see our part in the system. We may not see the other person's part in the system because our paradigm or the way we see things doesn't see it very clearly. Even though all the facts are there, we're going to interpret the facts based on our imprinting, our earlier learning, and what we have come to see as normal. How can we begin to differentiate ourselves from the surrounding emotional process in our relationship systems? First of all, and I just have a few points today, borrow someone else's objectivity. I loan my objectivity every day with clients. And when I was in therapy, when I was doing in coaching, and when I was getting help from other people, I borrowed from their objectivity because they could see things I could not see. And that's one of the healing processes of coaching and of therapy is for someone to see things differently than the way you see them, because the way you see them often keeps us caught or stuck. And so we want to borrow someone else's objectivity. The fly should ask the dog, why can't I fly through this window? The dog never tries to fly through the window. The dog sees this process and sees what's going on differently than the fly. And if the fly could ask the dog, then the dog would say, well, you need to realize that there are windows that are transparent and that if they're around buildings or around a car, then they can be difficult to detect, but you have to be aware of the surroundings and their context, the dog would say, if the dog could talk. Secondly, use paradoxical thinking to give you some wiggle room in your paradigm. And your paradigm maker needs some wiggle room in it. If the fly could only stand back and take in the whole, it would not attempt the ill-fated feat. And so we can look at the downsides of the reasonable action and look at the upside of unreasonable actions. That's a way to twist your brain to kind of get out of that box and to get out of your way of what you know to be normal. I think of some examples when we look at the upside of being difficult and the downside of being helpful. And I think if we can think in those paradoxical terms, we can see more outside of our box. I'll give you a couple examples. When I was a pastor, many times addicts or alcoholics, and I know they have a disease and they have problems and they need treatment, But they will go from church to church to church, preying on the codependency of the church to help them with some money, which they will go use to buy alcohol or drugs or whatever. But they're not going to ask for drug money. They're going to ask for, well, I need gas money, or I need to get diapers for my kid. And so they will lie so that the codependent or the pastor or the church will feel sorry for them and give them the money. Then they'll go use it for nefarious reasons. And I had that happen quite frequently when I had my office in the church and people would come by. I worked with alcoholics and addicts for years, so I always kind of sensed that process going on with certain people who would come and ask for money. And instead of being helpful, because I thought, how am I going to deal with all these requests all the time when people come and ask for money? How am I going to keep myself out of that? I'm going to feel guilty if I don't do it. And I should just give them money no matter what, because that's what a church should do. Well, a church should do that, especially when it's for inappropriate end and with no accountability. And so I would always try to be helpful. I would end up enabling, and I would end up with stress, guilt, all those kinds of things in giving money. So I was always trying to be helpful. Well, I thought, well, what if I wasn't helpful? What if I became more difficult? And so the next person who came, they'd say, oh man, I need this money. We need some gas so we can go get some groceries. And I've got a wife and kids at home and da-da-da-da-da. And instead of getting caught in that, I decided to be difficult or less helpful. And what I would say is, hey, I know how you're feeling. We got to change the roof on this church because it's older and we need to get a new roof. I haven't paid my taxes yet. That's going to be a fortune. They don't pay me too much here at my work. And I begin describing my problems. So I'm becoming more difficult, but that disconnects me from that manipulative or enmeshing behavior of the person coming asking for money. And then I go, man, sure wish I could help. But I'll tell you, we are just behind on everything. And then stay silent. And then they go, oh, well, they don't even know what to do with someone who's going to be difficult like that. I'm not rejecting them. I'm not hurting them. I'm just not playing the role in the pattern the way they expect me to play that role. So being difficult in your family of origin, being difficult in a relationship can actually be a disconnecting way. I didn't say be mean and be reactive. I said intentionally difficult, intentionally unhelpful. And there's a couple authors who talk about that. And I love it when they talk about that because that's gotten me out of a lot of tight spaces. So if you can think paradoxically, this is what I'm doing. What if I do the opposite intentionally? What effect would it have? Just like if somebody is a golden child and they want to get out of the role of being a golden child. Well, become more difficult, become more problematic. I didn't say be reactive and stir up a bunch of problems. I'm just saying own the problems that you have and not be such a hero or not overfunction. And the system will have an interesting reaction to you. We also want to move away from the why orientation. Why is this happening? Why is this happening this way? It will be more clear and become more clear after we actually change. Sometimes change happens first, insight happens second. So it's good for us to practice changing first and then seeing what insight it gives us. And I also like the when questions rather than the why or the how, because those questions of how and why often keep us stuck. Whereas a when question, when am I going to make this change? When am I going to do what I should do for myself? That's a better question. Or to acknowledge I'm not ready to do that for myself. And so I have to accept the way things are because I'm not ready to do that. And also moving away from I can't or I don't know how to I won't or I'm not ready. That helps free me from the emotional system and emotional dynamic. Remember, time doesn't change you as much as maturing does. Maturing is doing the work of changing self in the system. And you remember the old adage, time heals all wounds? Well, you could also say time cements old wounds for a long time. It doesn't always heal. There is some healing with time and getting a break, and I understand that can be positive, but I think maturing is also the best way to heal things and to heal relationships. Sixthly, view problems as symptoms of the problem versus trying to fix them. And I think that's very common. Let me take the guy who is alcoholic or addict, comes up to the church, and let me take this approach with him. Well, I think you probably have a drug or alcohol problem and you really do need to get your life together and you need to either find Jesus or you need to go get some treatment or whatever. Well, we don't have that kind of relationship, he and I. He's asking me for financial help, probably for a nefarious reason. And so I go in to try to fix it. And then if he comes back at me and saying, oh, well, you're not very much of a Christian, you're not very giving, you're just judgmental and harsh. Now I feel guilty, I feel ashamed, or I feel like I've not done God's work. And I end up with those kinds of dynamics. And because I was focusing on the symptom, not the real problem. The real problem is, yes, they probably need to get help for their problems, but I don't want to enable that by what they're doing, going church to church to church and getting some money. I don't want to enable that. And that's the most power I have with this individual as I have in contact with them. I mean, certainly I can pray with them if I want. I can even say, hey, I think you need to go get some treatment. But generally, they're not going to stay around for that kind of interaction most times. So I want to deal with the problem underneath and not the symptom. And the same is true in our marriages, our friend relationships. Often the problem is a symptom. And you want to try to look at the underlying problem and how the relationship works. I think one way to change that paradigm is through reading. Reading books like Roberta Gilbert's books, Harriet Lerner's books, Jenny Brown's book, Andrea Shera. Those kinds of books are a help to help begin to change your mind and to change your perspective on things. And I think that's very important if we use those resources. So these are some things I wanted to share with you today. I hope you enjoyed the video and have a great day.